MSW Media.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So yeah, now it's cleanup on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be cleanup on aisle 45.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 138 of Cleanup on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok, and frankly, I don't know how we're going to cover everything in 1 hour, but we'll do our best. We have multiple filings from the defendants and the district attorney in Fulton County. Mark Meadows lost his bid to remove his case to federal court. Chesebro has lost his motion to sever from Sidney Powell, and Judge McBurney has released the Fulton County Special Grand Jury Report.
Yeah, with no opposition. Very interesting. We also have a Senate GOP report that admits they have no evidence of Biden corruption, despite, I think, McCarthy opening an impeachment inquiry today. We have potential plea talks for indicted Republican Congressman George Santos. Maybe plea talks, but we aren't sure. But we'll talk about that. And the Senate has confirmed Biden's FCC pick, ending a years-long deadlock. But first, we have to thank our new patrons. If you want these episodes ad-free and early, and you want access to the bonus episodes every week, head to patreon.com/aisle45pod, AISLE45POD. Whatever name you sign up with, we will read it. So, big thanks this week to Susan Lefevre, Shotzi Olson, Tarkin Fintim Lin Bin Win Bim Lim Bus Stop F Tang Ole Biscuit Barrel.
Nice. I saw that and I'm like, no way you make it through. But you did with flying colors.
Thank you. Susan Martin, Corona Knight, Victoria Carollo Blake, Vicky Tandowski, SB and SoCal, Susan Belknap, Astria, Preston K, and Pam Booth. Again, thanks everybody so much for signing up to be a patron for Cleanup on Aisle 45. You make this show go. So let's start with Meadows. He had a bad week. He lost his motion to remove his case in federal court. And since then, he has asked for an emergency stay pending appeal to the 11th Circuit. And this is bad news for Meadows, but it's also bad news for Donald and the others who want to remove this to federal court. We know that Jeffrey Clark wants to remove. Some of the fraudulent electors want to remove to federal court. And Trump filed something that doesn't exist in the law with the court saying, hey, guys, I might file to remove my case to federal court.
Call me maybe motion, right?
And, I think he was waiting to see what would happen with Meadows' arguments. And now that they have failed spectacularly, maybe he'll file, but with different reasons than Meadows put forth. And, I got to say, I thought that he was going to lose based on the nature of the RICO statute, because Fani Willis got to weigh in, and we talked about this last week, and she said, look, he doesn't have to have any overt acts because of RICO. Everyone else's overt acts count. Like, you are responsible for the actions of everyone in that criminal enterprise. That's the nature of the RICO statute. But when Judge Jones weighed in, he's like, you didn't do any of this under the color of your office. There was maybe one overt act where you set up a phone call that could be considered part of your job, but no, none of this is part of your job. And you also kind of violated the Hatch Act, my bro. Sort of
just a little
what
bit.
He's, because on the stand, Meadows said, yeah, no, I was, campaigning for Trump. That's not legal. Now, there's no criminal punishment for violating the Hatch Act. You can be fired. That's how they tried to remove me from my job because I had a podcast about the Mueller investigation. They failed at that because I didn't violate the Hatch Act. But Meadows did. So that's fun. And now I'm interested in your thoughts on, does this make him not a good witness if he wants to cooperate down the road with, say, Jack Smith?
Well, I mean, there's certainly going to be issues with what he and, Fonnie Willis, as we mentioned, certainly during the bonus episode, I think, talked about Meadows' statements on the stand, and to the extent some of those statements were in conflict with earlier testimony that he had given. I think the more he talks about things that are, if not a plain false statement chargeable as a felony, they certainly are something that somebody on the other side, and presumably Meadows would, in this context would be a prosecution witness, that somebody on the defense side of the table would say, hey, look, even the prosecutor, and this isn't just in Fulton County, right? This is somebody potentially, if Meadows were to testify in federal court, either, probably not in Florida as far as we know, but certainly as it relates to the D.C. charges that Jack Smith has brought, a defense attorney can sit there and say, hey, look, isn't it true that this, in a court filing, the district attorney in Fulton County indicated that there's reason to question your credibility. So absolutely, this is something that they could go after Meadows for trying to impeach his credibility, not just in Fulton County, but in any other court that's going on. So this is, as we, kind of talked about and predicted, this is getting really complicated really fast because you have a lot of interlocked pieces that, Mar-a-Lago kind of stands alone, right? The classified documents, it's a discrete set of events. There are some players, did for instance, that Trump waving around the war plan that allegedly Milley had provided him about, as it's been reported, war plans with regard to Iran, that was, it appears, to writers who were engaged with Mark Meadows writing his biography. So that there's a little overlap there, but that's kind of a clean set of events. The rest of this is all intertwined. And so, again, I think it is problematic for Meadows. I think, does that diminish his value as a witness to the feds? Potentially, I would hope this is something that they already sort of thought through and said, look, this is, and it was the Michael Cohen problem that a lot of the things that, like when you looked at certainly, Mueller and others, and Alvin Bragg, I'm sure, is thinking about this as well. You are going to have people attack Michael Cohen's credibility. So, this is something that prosecutors think about. It is not something that, they're just suddenly waking up and saying, oh my God, we got a problem. I'm willing to bet they've thought this through, but it's certainly not an easy, clean fact pattern. And, stepping back a little bit, just looking at Meadows, in many ways, his argument to remove this to federal court, other than Trump, he had some of the strongest arguments going. And when you look at, Jeff Clark's trying, but he, same thing with him. He had multiple people telling him, Jeff, that's not your job. And so, he was repeatedly told by people, saying up to and including, you're an environmental lawyer. When we go back to your office, when we have an oil spill, we'll call you, sort of thing. So I think the fact that Meadows lost this, does present a road ahead that is problematic for the other defendants. But we'll see what the 11th Circuit does. I mean, the 11th Circuit may reverse. And, if the 11th Circuit doesn't, I'm willing to bet you that Meadows is going to try and take this to the Supreme Court. So there are at least two more opportunities for Meadows to get this decision reversed.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's we'll see what happens, but it's probably going to be an expedited 11th Circuit appeal. I'm not sure he'll get a stay remanding this to state court, but he might be an administrative stay. We'll see, and we'll let you know. And talking about, speaking of standing alone, the Chesebro, he lost his motion to sever from Sidney Powell. He was like, get her away from me. I don't want her anywhere near me. And the Judge McAfee, he is the new judge. He was appointed this year by Governor Kemp down in Georgia. He's a state judge down there. He's presiding over this case, but he has a history of being a litigator in trials. And so he said, no, you can't. No, you haven't made the argument. You haven't met the very low bar you need to meet to sever from here. So they will be tried together, Powell and Chesebro, on October 23rd, pending, any delay. But he didn't seem keen on trying all 19 defendants together, which is still the district attorney's position. But when you have people who do not want to take advantage of the speedy trial law in Georgia, who want the extra time, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to force them. So I think, as I've said from the beginning, I think we're going to end up having different buckets of people here. We'll have some early trial folks. And he said, the judge said, Other people who want to sever will take them one case at a time as they come in and see whether or not we're going to have them all early people tried together. But I think it's going to come down to all the early people go first. And then we'll have the people who don't want to go early. And they might be split up depending on how many there are. Because, you would usually do like 6 at a time so that you don't have 19 people at a defense table, or now 17. And then, we were going to see if anybody was going to be removed to federal court. I don't see that happening with the pretty solid arguments that Judge Jones put forth to not remove this to federal court. And I don't think that any of the other people who want to remove or may want to remove are going to be able to make an argument that pierces what Judge Jones found with Meadows specifically. So I think we're going to have two sets of trials. I think we're going to have the regular stuff going sometime, whenever down the road. We'll have the early people going, and I don't think it's going to be October 23rd either, but that's the current date set. Because there can be tolls for I think Georgia law works the same way that the Federal Speedy Trial Act works, which means, some of the days don't count and they have status updates and things like that. But it might not. They might have to go by the end of October. But seems like they might end up going together. So we'll see. But his motion to sever from Sidney failed. So that's where we are with that.
Yeah, and I don't blame Judge McAfee for not wanting to try all 19. I mean, just from, a couple of recent experiences, if you look at the federal trials for both the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, I mean, there were several defendants tried together, and those were, complex. Because remember, if you're going to try people together, you've got to get all of those defendants not only in the same room, but all of their attorneys in the same room, and that somebody might have an objection to something that somebody doesn't, and you may have disagreement between the defendants. You may have agreement between the defendants. I mean, I'm thinking back to, Rachel Maddow's Ultra podcast series talking about this just convoluted, horrible, complex trial. And I don't blame Judge McAfee at all for wanting to split it up. And I agree with you. I mean, I think if you have some defendants that do not want a speedy trial, that want more time, I don't know how the DA gets to, say, no, you don't get that. We're going to try you all quickly, as much as she may want all 19 at once. I don't think that's going to happen. And, on the other hand, I do think, both Chesebro and Powell do have the right to a speedy trial. So I would be shocked if this goes on October 23rd, but certainly, a nice addition to the Thanksgiving meal of, turkey, ham, and Sidney Powell to the slammer would be a lovely way to finish up or begin the holiday season. So we'll see. And I'm curious too, like, is it who else joins the two of them? And whether or not, as, certainly if they are convicted, there is nothing like watching one of your co-conspirators, no longer allegedly, but now, convicted by a jury, heading off to jail. And that causes a real, again, as you sit down with your family and you're trying to figure out what your goals are and what your trial strategy is, watching some of the co-defendants be convicted is a very sobering thing. So, and again, some personal opinion here, couldn't happen to a nicer person than Sidney Powell. She's, of course, presumed innocent, and the government will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she broke these laws. But looks like we're going to find that out, within the next couple of months.
Yeah, and not only that, but she is an unindicted co-conspirator so far up in the D.C. case, one of the 6 co-conspirators with Donald Trump in the Jack Smith indictment. And if there's some mop-up cases after they're done with Trump and she gets indicted and she's already a convicted felon elsewhere, that's not good for your sentencing guidelines. So it's something also to take into consideration. There's some other filings as well that there's, there's going to be so much paper in this case. But Jeffrey Clark has asked Judge McAfee to extend pretrial deadlines in his case until 30 days after he's done litigating any appeals resulting from his efforts to move his state criminal charges to federal court. So Clark wants to go through losing in Judge Jones's court and then appealing to the 11th Circuit and going up to SCOTUS, and then he gets 30 days for pretrial deadlines. That's what he has filed and asked Judge McAfee for. We'll let you know how that goes. And John Eastman has filed to sever his case from his co-defendants who have filed speedy trial demands in Fulton County, namely Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro. So that's the next one up that Judge McAfee will look at, is to see whether or not Eastman will be able to sever. I don't think that I can't think of a new argument that will make this severable. I think, honestly, everyone who wants a speedy trial is going to go at the same time, unless there's more than 6. And then they might split it up, or 8 or something like that. But, we'll see. We'll see how it ends up happening. Fani's last big RICO case, I think she did 11 or 12 all at the same time. So she might go up to that high of a number, but 19 is pretty unwieldy. So I don't, and you don't want to force people into an early trial if they don't want it. So that's kind of how I think this will go down. We'll cover all the paper, but I don't think Clark and Eastman have a prayer here if Meadows didn't.
Right. Agreed. And I think, the arguments that Eastman might make, I think are very similar to those that Sidney Powell did, that, to the extent that his, he's going to claim certainly some of the material, his activity was either privileged because he was acting as an attorney and, that he shouldn't be held liable for advising a client one way or the other, that those are largely, Sidney Powell has many of the same arguments. So I can't envision a scenario where Judge McAfee wants to sort of proliferate multiple quick trials coming up, and it would make sense to try, certainly since he's already said, no, Sidney and Ken, you're going together, I would think Eastman would get lumped in. We'll see, I think, soon enough, because again, there's not a lot of time. If they are going to, I agree with you, it isn't going, in my opinion, isn't going to hit October 23rd, but even if it slips a week or two, that's still, that's a month and a half from now. So that's not a lot of time. So I think we'll, find out soon. And again, we'll be here to keep you posted and up to date every week as this rolls along.
Yeah, and the DA's argument for trying all 19 together is the same argument they're going to use to try all of the speedy trial people together, which is, hey, I know that maybe 7 seems like a lot to go at once, but it would take a lot less time than 7 individual trials. And that's what they argued for the 19. Like, I know 19 seems like a lot, but if we tried everybody individually, that would take way longer than grouping them all together. And I think that's going to be they'll have a similar argument there. That and just the nature of the RICO statute itself. So we'll see how it goes. We'll let you know. I have a feeling, but we'll keep you posted on what actually happens. All right, we have to take a quick break, but we have a lot more to get to today. So we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hey, welcome back. We have more patrons to thank. Terry Greased, Minimum Wager, Still Suki, Yo Mama is so fat, but Donald Trump is still fatter. Devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for an election to steal. He was in a bind. He was way behind by 11,780 votes. Heather Joy, Julie either Saint or Street or ST, Courtney Mooring, Schmutz, Carol Bartolini, Barbara Stoddard, and Patricia Shelton. Thank all of you so much. You are the engine that makes this program run, a critical part of the family that allows us to do this week in and week out. So thank all of you very, very much. Appreciate your support, and you make all of this possible. So thank you. So, Allison, let's stay down in Georgia. So we have a number of filings and letters from Fani Willis. And first was a motion to restrict dissemination of jurors' identities. You may remember from the earlier grand jury that by Georgia law that the identities of the grand jurors are published. And so as one would likely expect, as soon as they were published with the indictments of the 19, they were very quickly picked up on social media. A lot of folks then did some research, published not only the names of the people, but their home addresses and other things, including on places like, kind of fringe websites. One, 8kun, which I didn't realize used to be hosted by a U.S. provider, but now is hosted by, I think it's a Russian provider. So when it comes to trying to track down like any sort of threats, it's not like you can go to somebody in Seattle, Washington, or Palo Alto, California. You're not going to get anywhere by trying to take a subpoena to somebody in St. Petersburg or Moscow or wherever it is that's hosting it. So there's really some pretty pernicious activity that's going on. And as it turns out, it's not just on some of these websites. It's not just the jurors for the grand jury that indicted them. It's also Fani Willis and some of her prosecutors. So it's a real problem. And then this is, this motion is saying, hey, look, I think in anticipation of the trial, some desire to say, we want to restrict the dissemination of the jurors' identities. And hopefully there's a long-term solution in Georgia law, but that's not going to come about before these trials begin. So it's an issue. I'm curious, I'm sure it is part of Georgia wanting it to be a sort of sunshine provision so that there wasn't any secrecy to the judicial process. But yet here we are in a place where, unfortunately, in no small measure, in my opinion, because of Donald Trump's statements, we have people involved in the judicial process, judges, prosecutors, jurors, who are living in fear for their safety and the safety of their families. And so we'll see how that motion works out. I think there's an argument to be made that, perhaps you can keep those identities restricted, certainly during the trial, and maybe afterwards publicize them. But I'm curious to see how they rule on that, because it's a real, if I'm a juror. And keep in mind, too, this isn't just like, oh, hey, great. So you're telling me if I do jury duty on this, that I'm going to be faced potentially with, threats to me and my family and people doxing me and swatting me and doing all this other stuff. And, oh, by the way, how many people are you trying, and how long is this trial going to take, and how many months? Actually, so not only do I have to live in fear, but I have to live in fear over the span of many months where I'm not going to be able to go to my job or look for work or whatever my circumstances are, have my life disrupted just because I'm going to be here for such a long time. There's some challenging aspects to this that I hope Georgia is able to account for. They've done it before, but not in something like this. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, and there's a current RICO case in Fulton County, the YSL case. They're 8 months in and they don't have a jury yet. So it's been taking a really long time. I hope that these jurors do get because normally they'll be like their age, their job. Sometimes they don't give out their names, but she doesn't want any of personally identifying information out on these jurors, and I think that's for the best. Also, there was a letter to Jim Jordan from Fani Willis accusing him of interference in her prosecution. She said, saying Jordan's August 24th letter to her included, quote, inaccurate information and misleading statements. And she accused Jordan of improperly interfering with the state criminal case and attempting to punish her for personal political gain. Quote, its obvious purpose is to obstruct a Georgia criminal proceeding and to advance outrageous misrepresentations. As I make clear below, there's no justification in the Constitution for Congress to interfere with a state criminal matter, as you attempt to do. This is some reporting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They say, in her response, Willis said Jordan's concerns about the timing of the investigation were unfounded. She noted that many witnesses were uncooperative, requiring subpoenas to compel their testimony. And she said that forced her to seek judicial approval to convene a special grand jury to compel testimony and the production of documentary evidence. Even then, she said, some witnesses resisted, requiring further delays. Atlanta Journal-Constitution goes on to say that Willis also responded to allegations that she is unfairly targeting Trump. She says, quote, his status as a political candidate cannot make him legally immune from criminal prosecution. And she noted that the special grand jury recommended charges in the case, and a separate jury issued the indictments. It's not Fani Willis's, she doesn't indict, right? This is two separate grand juries, the special purpose grand jury and then the regular grand jury that issued the indictments. And she says, quote, face this reality, Chairman Jordan. The select group of defendants who you fret over in my jurisdiction are like every other defendant, entitled to no worse or better treatment than any other American citizen. Your letter makes clear that you lack basic understanding of the law, its practice, and the ethical obligations of attorneys generally and prosecutors specifically. She actually goes on to recommend a book. She says, there's a book you can read. It's $249. And then she says, if you and your colleagues follow through on your threats to deny this office federal funds, please be aware that you will be deciding to allow serial rapists to go unprosecuted, hate crimes to be unaddressed, and to cancel programs for at-risk children. Such vengeful, uncalled-for legislative action would impose serious harm on the citizens we serve, including the fact that it will make them less safe. So she had some words for our friend Jim.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at this point it's just completely transparent what Jordan's trying to do. This is, coming from the Republican Party of Law and Order, right? We're going to, defund you and everything you're doing to prosecute crime across Georgia just in the service of, the orange god that everybody has sworn fealty to. So I don't think it's going to, Jordan can try and will try to muck around as best he can. I think it's clear that, He's not going to make a lot of headway, much as they didn't up in New York either. But when it comes to funding, I mean, some of this, come on, it is clear that but for Donald Trump being charged, that none of this would be going on, and particularly ironic given the Republican and certainly the Freedom Caucus push for limited government and the federal government's too big, and we need to fundamentally return power to the states and get the big government out of the day-to-day business of the United States of America, except in Georgia when it comes to Donald Trump. And then you all can go F yourselves because we're going to stop you from doing that. So it is, and oh, by the way, yes, we need to, go after, the criminals, and, it won't be the first time Jim Jordan has sheltered, criminals and allegedly, pederasts, for people, victims under his care. So this I'm sure isn't a new feeling for him. But, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. Nancy Mace was on CNN interviewing about, the Biden impeachment, saying, well, and when faced with, hey, you don't have any facts to support an impeachment inquiry, saying, oh, well, that's why we have an inquiry to come up with facts. I mean, it's like, just the same, re-rolled version of James Comer.
Looking for elector
and Jim Jordan
fraud.
looking for, mobilize the base and, confuse the process. So it's clear.
We don't have any evidence of voter fraud, but we'll get it. Send us money and we'll get it. That's what this reminds me of. We don't have any evidence. In fact, the Senate Republicans said there isn't any. It didn't look great. It's a little awkward, they said. Maybe problematic that Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma, but there's nothing here. And then they open an impeachment inquiry. They can't find it. This is what the Durham investigation was. It was what the David Weiss investigation was. It's Trump's tale as old as time thing. Announce an investigation. We'll find the shit later. That's what it is. What Ukraine, which, with the extorting Zelensky, that's their MO. And they're doing it here again. And I don't think it's going to work out well for them. But her letter was very pointed. I love what she's like. Here's a book you can read. It's only $249. You should go get it. All about RICO. You should read up on it. RICO for Dummies, it's called. No, it's not, but it should be. Also, Fani Willis filed an opposition to Latham's motion for removal to federal court. And I don't normally want to go over like every single opposition and filing and all the papering that's happening in this trial, but this one was interesting because she pushed back on that 1960 Hawaii excuse, and I'm glad she did. She said repeated invocations to precedent allegedly set in Hawaii during the 1960 presidential election misses the mark by a wide margin. First, and this principle hardly seems necessary to explain, actions that did not result in prosecution 60 years ago in a different jurisdiction with different election code and criminal statutes presided over by different prosecuting agencies and with differing substantive evidence of criminal intent provides zero protection for defendant Latham and her co-defendants who conspired to advance the 2020 fraudulent elector scheme in Georgia. Second, the factual situations are so readily distinguishable as to make the comparison meaningless. In 1960, by the December 19th date when Hawaii electors met, the Republican slate of electors had been certified by the governor based on the initial tally of votes, but due to the close margin of less than 150 votes, an official recount was ongoing. In the present case, when defendant Latham and the other fraudulent electors met, 2 recounts had already been completed, each of which confirmed a margin of victory for then-candidate Biden of more than 11,000 votes. Additionally, in Hawaii, when the recount resolved in the Democratic candidate's favor, JFK, that was on December 28th, and only after a court affirmed that process of a recount, the governor of Hawaii recertified the election and appointed the Democratic slate of electors. Defendant and her cohort of fraudulent electors had no such official stamp of approval. And I'm really glad she went through this exercise. I like how she's like, I can't believe I have to fucking say this, but here we go. And so I'm glad she addressed it.
Yeah, and by the way, Hawaii, this was the first time they had ever done it. It became a state, right, in August 1959. So this is the very first time that Hawaii had ever come up with needing to come up with electors and certify them. And so, they're so completely at odds with the facts that exist or the Hawaiian example from 60 is so completely at odds. I agree with you. I'm glad she did it, but it does, this is the thing that, yes, it's a pain in the butt for her to have to respond to it. She does have to respond to it. I'm glad she did. But that's the thing when you start talking about like 19 defendants. Are all 19 of them going to file nonsense motions that you have to take the time to respond to? No, but it does make it complex. And so, again, it's part of the goal is not that this has any expectation of success. Latham may, the attorneys and talking say, hey, look, this isn't going to succeed. Part of the issue is it doesn't matter if it's going to succeed or not. Part of what you're doing is just trying to throw sand in the gears to slow everything down. Because again, the goal is the longer you can stretch this out, whoever you are individually, to postpone you going to jail, and cumulatively to push this out past the election. It's the broader sort of goal is to delay for any number of reasons. And this is, an example of that. And good reasoning, good legal argument from Fani Willis, but just an example of the sort of stuff that we're going to be seeing for the next many months as this moves forward.
Absolutely. And we'll keep on top of it for you as best we can. Like I said, we're not going to go through every single filing. She makes excellent arguments in all of them, but I wanted to bring up this Hawaii thing because a lot of people have brought it up and they keep bringing it up as some sort of an example of what they were trying to do. And she just obliterates it in a few short paragraphs. So, all right, we have more to get to, but we need to take another quick break. Everybody stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. We have more patrons to thank. A big shout out to Poppy Massey, Laura Amon, Therese, Janet Allured, Captain Sanity, awesome, Brent Medling, Teresa Tansey, Francis, Christine Walk, Sid, Even, which is EEVENN, at dj3vn.com. We have Judith Chin, Lord Harvey McCregel. All of you, thank you so very much for your support. We couldn't do it without you. I want to now shift over to the special grand jury, the special purpose grand jury report. This is just a quick intro from Kate Broombach at Associated Press. The special grand jury that investigated efforts by Trump and others to overturn Georgia's 2020 election recommended indictments against twice as many people as the 19 ultimately charged by prosecutors, leaving South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham among those not indicted. So, first of all, Judge McBurney, who presided over this, said he was going to release the full thing on September 8th unless there was any opposition. There was no opposition. Nobody filed anything to oppose this. Maybe people are running out of money. I don't know. But nobody opposed the release of this, including people who weren't indicted. And I don't know if they got target letters from special purpose grand jury. I don't know how any of that works. I'm mostly familiar with the federal system. But I don't know if they knew that they were being recommended for indictment and then were waiting to see if they were indicted. And 20 people were like, whew, okay, I'm not going to be indicted. But what was more interesting to me were the people who weren't indicted. They mentioned, the Associated Press there mentions Lindsey Graham. There was also Cleta Mitchell, who was knee-deep in all this. She wasn't indicted. Mike Flynn was recommended for indictment. Now we have senators, former senators, I should say, Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue as being part of the criminal enterprise. Now, there's a lot of things that the special purpose grand, they aren't prosecutors, right? The special purpose grand jury. They don't have, the same kind of tools and things like that to decide whether or not they're going to bring charges, because they don't. The special purpose grand jury does not indict people. They only make recommendations. And so to see that there were, I think, 39 people that were supposed to be charged. I remember my guess was 17.
Yeah, and I thought you were over. So, and
So this, I think the main thing that this shows is one of the arguments that I think the people on the right were making was that, she's out to get everybody. This is a witch hunt. This is a rubber stamp. She's just going to indict everybody they recommend. And now we see she indicted one less than half of the people. And there are some big names on there that a lot of us feel should have been indicted. But what does that say to you? Do you think they're cooperating?
No, I don't think so. I think it largely indicates that there's some amount of prosecutorial discretion that's going on. It absolutely shows that she's not a rubber stamp out to get everybody and politically motivated is false, that she carefully took with her team looked at all the evidence. And remember, as you pointed out, the special purpose grand jury, they're not prosecutors. I mean, they're everyday citizens. I don't know whether or not there are any actual attorneys who are in the grand jury, but they're just looking at the testimony and evidence that was presented to them and looking at Georgia law and making recommendations. What they aren't doing is the sort of like, the state version of a prosecution memo, right? Where attorneys, where prosecutors will look at all the evidence and say, okay, not only did all these people say this, but let's take a look at what we would have to do to achieve a unanimous verdict, which, again, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What sort of speech or debate protections would Lindsey Graham have, or Kelly Loeffler, or others, who were in any sort of legislative position? What might they argue if we were to charge them? What sort of credibility issues does anybody who's going to testify against Mike Flynn or Cleta Mitchell, does somebody who's a critical witness come with a bunch of baggage? Have they, been found guilty of false statements in the past? Do they have problems with their credibility? All these things that prosecutors have to do, special purpose grand jury wasn't doing that at all. So it doesn't surprise me at all to see, again, one less than half of the recommended folks being charged. Again, whatever my personal feelings of who I would like to have been charged, I think the overwhelming message that this sends to me is Fani Willis and her team are doing an objective job of looking at the law, looking at the evidence and facts that they have, and applying that against who they're going to decide to charge, or in this case, not charge. So, was Lindsey Graham up to shenanigans? No question about it. Mike Flynn? No question about it, in my opinion. Cleta Mitchell? Absolutely. Again, all in my opinion, from what's been written about. But at the end of the day, I think this speaks very well to Fani Willis and her team, that they are not simply, political, hatchet men and women out to get everybody they can on the right side of the aisle. That's not what's going on. And, the question, why didn't anybody object to it? I don't know. Some of this I can see that, for somebody like, any number of these folks, almost like, Donald Trump's, complete exoneration, right? They looked at me and didn't charge me. And it's just another example of, the woke libs trying to go after me. So, put $5 in the hat that's being passed around and help me defend myself. And it's all, goes into the grift, the never ending grift, and whatever Mike Flynn's tour across America that he's, doing all these crazy revivals to, the fleecing of America. Right. So again, it's interesting because it shows the scope of the people that they were looking at, but does it surprise me? No. And if anything, it kind of reassures me a little bit that there was a measure of discretion that was going on within the Fulton County District Attorney's Office.
Yeah. And we should remember, too, that, a lot of folks think the Senator Lindsey Graham and Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, that not indicting them might have been a political consideration. But I do have to say that not wanting to fight, and this, of course, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know why they weren't indicted. But if it had something to do with having to battle the speech or debate clause with this Supreme Court, maybe that wasn't a battle that was worth the taxpayers' money. But that, I don't think that's a political consideration. I think that's a legal consideration. But also, we don't know that that's the reason she didn't indict them. Now, some of the people who weren't indicted are cooperating. We know that those 8 fraudulent electors that were offered immunity after the special purpose grand jury, because their lawyer didn't give it to them, didn't make them the offer. We know they're cooperating. So there could be other cooperators here. But again, we just don't know. But, it's interesting. The Mike Flynn and the Cleta Mitchell seems pretty open and shut. But again, I'm not a prosecutor and I'm not looking at it from that point of view. And also on this list is Burt Jones. Fani Willis had to recuse from investigating Burt Jones because she did a campaign fundraiser. She was at a fundraiser for his opponent. But he is being looked at now by a separate office. So just because he wasn't indicted here doesn't mean he won't be indicted by that other office. So I think that it might also be a mistake to think that just because people's names are on this list and they weren't indicted, that they won't be. And I'm talking specifically about Burt Jones. The rest of them, I'm sure Fani Willis did consider because she wasn't recused from their cases. So it's a fascinating look at what the special purpose grand jury put forward, because like you said, they don't have to decide about what a speech or debate clause battle looks like with the 11th Circuit and with this Supreme Court. Then that's just one example of many, 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 many things that could be why they didn't get indicted. But Mike Flynn and Cleta Mitchell stand out to me as interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is going to be not a worry, but a big question in my mind, again, sort of stepping back, is looking at that connective layer, right? The people like Cleta Mitchell, like Mike Flynn, like Roger Stone. There are a group of people right now that haven't been indicted either in a state court or in a federal court that were clearly involved in January 6th. And we've got accountability, we've got convictions, the senior leadership of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And now the charges against Donald Trump and the people, close and around him, certainly in Georgia, and presumably, co-conspirator 1 through 6 in Jack Smith's indictment of Trump. They are there, but there is this level, and it is
the
these
Willard.
Folks.
The Willard is
it's
missing.
the Willard crew, right? Yes, exactly. The Christina Bob. It's everybody in the war room, and it's like and again, it will be interesting to me to see how that shakes out, because one, they can be difficult cases to prove. What somebody actually said and did versus what you think they did, but you can't prove it. And two, that just these are so big and complex. There's always I remember working cases, particularly very complex ones. There are always avenues, there are always things that you can pursue that at some point you make a decision, okay, we need to focus what is the main goal here? Who are the what is it that we're trying to do? And yes, of course, it's, prosecute violations of law, but you can have 1,000 tentacles that go out for 1,000 miles for years and years and years. And there's frequently a decision to say, okay, we're going to scope it this way. And whatever is outside that scope, not that there wasn't crime there, not that there was an investigation to do, but just you don't have unlimited resources on unlimited time. And I think I'm very curious to see is how that bumps up against this connective layer, and whether or not people who quite possibly committed crimes don't get charged because it's just too big. And Allison, we've never seen, this is so big. You can't compare
huge.
This to Watergate. You can't even compare this to the stuff that Special Counsel Mueller did, which was plenty complex. This is so broad. When you look at everything at the federal level, at state after state after state, there's so much crime. And
even the one man 4-count indictment brought by Jack Smith that's supposed to be the quick one, they have potentially 250 witnesses.
Right.
So, when they're down there arguing in Georgia, 150 witnesses is going to take forever. We need all the time in the world. That's 150 is low compared to what's going on in D.C. And that's just for one man and 4 counts.
Exactly. And again, going back to that analog we talked about earlier, look at the federal trials of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. I mean, those took a long time. And this is certainly going to be, here the stakes are higher. There are going to be even more sort of litigious defendants, and expect them to be as complex and take as long. But again, the point is, anytime you get something that big and that complex, there are margin actors who don't, for better or worse, who don't get brought into the process, and maybe they should. And if you had 10 years and 1,000 attorneys to go after it, maybe you might, but you've got to make that call. And I think there's a very real possibility that some folks who did bad things, illegal things, are going to get away with it. Which is all the more, again, I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. The justice system will only satisfy a moral sense of desire for justice. It only goes so far. So, it will inevitably, if you are counting only on the judicial system to create social justice, to create justice broadly, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because there are limitations and guardrails built into the process. So the best thing you can do, if you feel outraged, if you're angry, if you want to do something, get involved, get out and vote. Get your neighbors, get your friends, get everybody, because your participation is the way to achieve that justice far more than what you're going to see given the limitations of our judicial system.
Absolutely. All right, we have just a couple more stories. I think we might get through this in an hour, Pete. We might actually do it.
We're done. We got Santos coming up. So
yeah, we do. We've got Santos and a couple of other quick stories and a new comings and goings. We haven't had one of those in a while, which is where, in fact, I think this is your first comings and goings, Pete.
It is.
We had an extensive segment on this show where people would be Trump administration people would be leaving and new people would be coming in, being replaced by Biden. It's still going on. So we have a comings and goings section today. But we have to take a quick break. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Stay with us.
All right, welcome back. It's time to thank our Hall of Fame patrons. You are the folks, you are the superstars. You are the founding members of all of the support that make this program go. You go above and beyond. You are absolutely the rock stars of this program. We cannot thank you enough for your support. And so this week, I want to thank Sharon Tukalski, at Dirt Road Dims, Dr. David, and Karen Sherman. Again, Hall of Famers, thank you so much for everything that you do and for your support. You truly, it's hard to thank you enough for your support, but we deeply appreciate it.
Blows my mind. I'm so grateful.
And it allows us to bring you stories like George Santos, who has, again, a judge has agreed. You know, you may remember that he was indicted much earlier this year. A judge has agreed to postpone a meeting scheduled this week after prosecutors asked for more time for the parties to discuss, quote, possible paths forward in this matter. Now, this was a joint submission, so this is something that both Santos and the prosecutors agreed to. There's some indication that, you know, the likely reading of the tea leaves is that potentially they're talking about a plea deal. The judge agreed and postponed it until October 27th, so about a month and a half from now. And so we'll see whether or not we get a plea deal from Santos, where obviously he would plead guilty to felonies, presumably. And the fallout from that, we'll see. We talked a little bit about on the, whether or not, even if he is convicted, whether or not he would be required to leave Congress. The answer, it appears, is no, but, we'll get there. Let's see what happens in the month and a half or so before October 27th. And there's more Santos news, and this was a little bit both aggravating and unsurprising. There's a report showing that there is an outside firm hired by Santos in 2021, essentially to do internal oppo research, right? To look into him, look for all the skeletons in his closet, all the things that might be embarrassing. And guess what? They found a ton of it and delivered it to a bunch of people who knew about all his BS and said nothing about it. So in 2021, they delivered a secret internal report detailing aspects of Santos's checkered background. Several of his aides found it too much to stomach, and they said, hey, look, this is horrible. This is bad. You need to drop out. And he said, nope, I'm not going to do it. And so then they quit. But then, even after New York voters elected Santos the following year, and news reports began exposing concerning questions about his conduct, the original report was still never made public until just recently, last week. So what's damning, and there's not a lot surprising, what we now know is that all the things we now know were known to Republican Party officials way back prior to his election. The conclusions of the report ultimately circulated among campaign strategists for top House Republicans and led the Congressional Leadership Fund, which is the primary super PAC dedicated to electing House Republicans. It was so concerning that said, hey, look, we're not going to support Santos. But nevertheless, standout stalwarts of the Republican Party like Elise Stefanik, nevertheless, after the report was compiled, nevertheless stood up and campaigned with Santos to get him elected. So again, it doesn't matter. There is no moral line too low for the Republican Party. If there is somebody out there that can get elected, if there's somebody out there who will just sign up and vote the way they want, it doesn't matter if you're Lion George Santos, allegedly. It doesn't matter if you're, 4-time indicted Donald Trump. It doesn't matter your behavior, the morality of it, the legality of it. There's no conscience to the party whatsoever. No.
They need that vote. They need that vote in the House so they can, have an impeachment inquiry based on no evidence.
That's why we're having it, to get the evidence, Allison.
I'm sorry. That's right. Just leave the rest to me and the Republicans in Congress. A Senate GOP report has found no wrongdoing in Hunter Biden's ties to Burisma, but they still felt it was awkward and problematic. Here's from the report. A report released Wednesday by Senate Republicans found the role of Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, on the board of Burisma, that's a Ukrainian energy company, was, quote, awkward and at times, quote, problematic. for U.S. officials dealing with the country, but provides no evidence and no new evidence, and found no instance of policy being altered as a result of his role. Remember that Comer was like, well, it's a pay for play. We'll do the policy because of this. And there's none. And this is from Senate Republicans. And Republican Senator Ron Johnson, who led this investigation as chair of the Homeland Security Committee, has openly said he hoped the election year probe would hurt the Democratic nominee. But the Republican report, based largely on new accounts, broke no new ground. So...
yeah, well, hopes it would hurt the Democratic nominee. So I'm sorry, Hunter Biden is running for president? Oh, no, that's right. That's right. His father is, and this report has nothing to do with his father. And if we want to talk about the children of people running for presidency, again, let's talk about children getting $2 billion from the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. And let's talk about whether that relationship makes it, quote unquote, awkward or, quote unquote, problematic for U.S. officials dealing with Saudi Arabia. I wonder if that also is the case. So again, it isn't, the thing is, it isn't a huge ledger of bad behavior on one side and an empty ledger on the other side. You've got bad behavior on one side, and then the other side is 5 times worse. And the sheer gall, the sheer sort of audacity to sit there and pursue this and make these accusations when all somebody has to say is, oh, what about Jared? And it's 1,000 times worse. What about Ivanka and the PRC? What about the Trump holdings and real estate deals in Oman? What
about Apollo and Citigroup and the 666 Fifth Avenue building with Qatar?
Right, and you want to talk about weird? Let's talk about the Deutsche Bank relationship and loans that were made, and whether or not there was sufficient, diligence made by the bank during a period that they were in under a non-prosecution agreement. Let's compare apples to apples. If you're so outraged by this behavior, if you're so concerned by how this might impact a candidate's suitability to be the president, fine. Let's do that.
Yeah, Nicole Wallace called it the Audacity Gap. And I thought that was a great turn of phrase.
Yeah, we don't even need to talk about the 19 indictments. Let's just leave that off the table for now. Let's talk about all the entanglements of the families surrounding the 2 presumptive presidential candidates and how those might be used to influence the candidate themselves and impact their suitability to be president of the United States. Let's do it. Let's start. Let's look at Jared and Ivanka and Eric and Sniffly Don Jr.
Yeah, even something as simple as the Qatar blockade with Saudi Arabia. Like, that whole thing was anyway, we're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Like, and they found nothing. It was just awkward. You have to say it that way. You have to say, well, we have our findings of the report and it's awkward, but that's really all we've got. Senator Ron Johnson, well done, sir.
Just a boil on the ass of Wisconsin. I'm sorry. That's
All right, well, it's time to resurrect an old tradition here on Cleanup on Aisle 45. This is the comings and goings section. We have a comings. This is so great. The Senate on Thursday confirmed Ana Gomez, President Biden's pick for the Federal Communications Commission. That has ended a lengthy partisan split at the regulatory agency. It gives Democrats the power to carry out major agenda items. Only happened, 2-3 years into
September 2023, sure.
Yep, senators voted 55-43 to confirm Gomez. She's an FCC veteran who's a communications policy advisor for the State Department. She will take the 3rd Democratic seat on the 5-member commission, which oversees broadband and communications regulations. And so there was a whole deadlock, delay. Senate Republicans just put this off. But now we finally have 3/5 majority on the FCC. And when I say we, I mean the Biden administration. I didn't mean to insinuate I was part of that. But anyhow, I'm glad that we finally got this seat taken care of. This makes me curious. What is going on with the Postal Board and DeJoy? Like, I need to do a deeper dive into that. I've got no new reporting on that.
Yeah, and maybe that's something we can take up during a bonus episode because I think he's still there. And the question is, look, I mean, the reason we have elections and administrations is that you implement policy. You may or may not like it certainly if you're on the other side, but the reality is you get elected, presumably if you're part of the executive branch, you want to be able to have things like this with an FCC board where there is a Democratic majority, just as if you're a Republican president, you would want to be able to put in a Republican majority. And the fact of the matter is that we're 2 years and 9 months after the inauguration, we finally, 2.5 years into a 4-year term, have an FCC able to engage in policy decisions in line with the elected president. Great. But it does make me wonder about the Postal Board. And I think you're right. I don't think there has been movement. So again, we can maybe take that up on the bonus episode if there's anything juicy there, but definitely something to look at. It's a not going, as the case may be, right?
It's a staying.
A staying.
I don't want that. But anyway, very good to have a comings and goings again. So excellent. We are now, Thundercats are go at the FCC, Pete. That is our show. We got it all in under an hour. I am actually a little bit taken aback by the fact that we were able to cover all that. On this past bonus episode, you and I talked a lot about the Elon Musk Starlink sabotage of Ukrainian communications on the ground. And now there's some Isaacson, the guy who wrote the book, is walking back what he said I don't know what's going on, but that was a fun episode. If you haven't listened to the bonus episode from this past weekend, that is what we discussed. And yeah, we'll take a look at DeJoy this weekend. We've got also a lot of input from some listeners who have a lot of things they wanted to talk about. We had somebody say, hey, where's the comings and goings section? That was a big part of cleaning up on aisle 45. And I was like, well, we really haven't had any. Everybody's job was pretty much in place, but we got one this week, so I'm happy to report that. But Pete, thanks to our patrons too, and we will be back this weekend with our bonus episode for patrons and back next Wednesday in your ears. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok.
And this has been Cleanup on Aisle 45. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.